Hi, I'm Spielberg Fan 1.
Y para todas las mujeres, yo soy Sexy Man E3.
And we're here to talk to you about how video games have been and are continuing to be utilized by the American military to introduce and train both potential and existing American military personnel to become efficient killing machines.
To aid in illustrating the connections between video games and the theater of modern American warfare, much of this vlog's discussion will be in relation to the perspectives provided by such technologies as weapon-mounted cameras and gun scopes that were used by the American military during the Battle of Mogadishu and the media associated with it. Namely, the film Black Hawk Down and the video game series Call of Duty. By examining these two sets of war-related media, we also hope to examine how video games have incorporated the American military technology that was used during and after the Battle of Mogadishu into the mechanics of different gaming genres, and how the dissemination of this technology across the gaming medium has had an effect on the individuals and technological advancements of the American military.
Where war was once strictly a battle between distinct physical entities, it has now evolved to a point where it exists in a perpetually virtualized realm. By virtualized realm, I'm referring to the American military's use of computers and weapon-mounted cameras within the theater of modern warfare. With these technological advancements in the American military becoming increasingly geared towards distancing American soldiers from performing direct combative actions in any theater of war, the average American soldier has been given the ability and option to distance themselves both physically and emotionally from the violence that they perpetuate.
This ability for an American soldier to virtually practice war is perfectly exemplified throughout the film Black Hawk Down.
Notice how in these clips the makeshift command center of the American Army serves as a location of security that is isolated from the violence that is occurring in real time outside of their location. As the commander of Task Force Ranger, Major General William F. Garrison takes on the metaphorical role of the gamer by observing and, to an extent, controlling the carnage that takes place during the Battle of Mogadishu through the visual aid of multiple aerial video feeds of the battle.
This way of viewing the war zone through a screen from a top-down perspective is utilized in numerous video games. Of particular interest, though, is the Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare series, as there are various instances in both the single-player campaign and online multiplayer in which access is granted to the player to use remote-control missiles and planes against their enemies. These American military weapons are controlled in-game through a weapon-mounted camera system that, when viewed through the player's TV screen, replicates the perspective granted to the character of Major General William F. Garrison in Black Hawk Down.
The virtualized top-down perspective isn't just limited to the role of weapon-mounted cameras, though, as it is often incorporated into the gaming fundamentals of the real-time strategy, or RTS for all you gamers out there. With such games as Age of Empires 2 and Age of Empires 3, and even Company of Heroes, players are encouraged to use their omnipotent aerial viewpoint to not only view the wars of classic history such as Genghis Khan's invasion of Eurasia and World War II, but to actively participate in controlling the forces of those battles via a point-and-click system. With this ability to be both a spectator and participant in the battles that unfold on the virtual plane of their screens, gamers are able to share Major General Garrison's assumption of an active role in combat from a remote distance.
While the aforementioned RTS games deal with historical battles in a virtual landscape, there are a plethora of other RTS games that break the mold of a gaming experience primarily rooted in existing past events. For example, games like StarCraft 2 and Halo Wars rely more on the concept of war in a futuristic setting, thus allowing for military technologies such as the Banshee, Viking, Scorpion tank, and Hornet to be dreamt up, creating more entertainment value for gamers while simultaneously forcing RTS players to adapt their strategies to new virtual scenarios that are thrust upon them.
I'm looking at you, Zergrush! It's these kinds of virtual scenarios, coupled with the variety and benefits of different races that a gamer can play as, that allow for gamers to practice creating sound strategies that will hopefully aid them when going head-to-head with fellow players in the multiplayer components of both of these games. Between the Terran, Zerg, and Protoss races from StarCraft 2 and the UNSC Marines and Covenant and Halo Wars, both of these games reflect, to an extent, the advantages and limitations that come with different fighting forces in an arena of war. This lesson in RTS strategizing is not only pivotal in helping gamers to win online matches if they can fully grasp and implement the tactics behind each warring faction, but has the capacity to serve as an important lesson for American military personnel when it comes to recognizing what technologies and powers are at their disposal in a theater of war, and what their allies can provide as aid in order to help them win a fight.
Going off the game of Halo Wars, the Halo franchise is not in fact an RTS series, but primarily a first-person shooter, or FPS for short. By this we mean that the entirety of gameplay takes place from the view of the gamer's character's helmet, complete with a heads-up display, HUD, and targeting reticle. It is this inclusion of the targeting reticle that we wish to draw attention to.
With the growth of first-person shooters placing gamers in a non-consequential situation where they can kill virtual enemies and die in-game only to respawn from a game checkpoint mere moments later, these games have turned to a state of verisimilitude in which looking down the barrel of a gun to aim or through a scope to use crosshairs to kill someone from a distance has replicated in the virtual realm and onto the gamer's television screen. The conventions of the FPS have gone on to be applied to such contemporary war genre games like MAG, Call of Duty 4, Modern Warfare 1 and 2, and Medal of Honor, but have even gone so far as to cross over into other gaming genres entirely, such as the Uncharted series and the famous Japanese role-playing game, or JRPG, series of Kingdom Hearts.
Thus, it's important that we bring up the Halo franchise, as the FPS games in the series manage to strike a balance between contemporary war genre game mechanics and a sci-fi setting that is much akin to the fantastical and adventurous universes of the Uncharted and Kingdom Hearts sagas.
The reasoning behind our focus on the Halo series lies in this melding of the war genre and science fiction. In support of Bernd Huphoff's theory of time serving as a distancing factor for viewers and media who are meant to participate in collective memory, we feel that the Halo series' futuristic setting allows for players to become more connected to the game, since it distances them from the battles being waged by the American military at the present time. This sentiment is highly paradoxical, though, as while the setting of the Halo series may isolate players from the reality of contemporary warfare, it still prepares them for a wartime experience. This is accomplished via the use of the first-person perspective throughout the majority of the games, in addition to having to typically strategize ways of killing off hordes of the Covenant enemy by oneself. The fact that players are placed in the role of a faceless, bionically enhanced super soldier that must slaughter waves of enemy aliens to survive for most of the games in the Halo series creates a virtual, almost entirely mechanized machine of destruction that players can control. It is the facelessness of this character, who gamers play as, that brings to mind an important point about the seeming fantasy of virtuality that Slavoj Žižek sums up perfectly in his essay, Passions of the Real, Passions of Semblance. To traverse the fantasy, therefore paradoxically, means fully identifying oneself with the fantasy.
Much like the modern warfare games, a large portion of the Halo franchise's popularity doesn't lie with the campaigns of the games, but rather their multiplayer components. With the scant limitations of the main character thrown out the window in the confines of the online multiplayer arena, gamers are allowed to fully project their personality and even voice into the on-screen counterparts that they play as. This access to fully immersing oneself in the online gaming experience is made possible by the game's options to let players customize their on-screen appearance and abilities through a menu that grants variety to gaming participants based on their level of commitment to the games they play, often through a point system. The very notion that the longer you play, the more you gain creates a pseudo-ranking system that is similar to that of the American military. The existence of such a ranking system, coupled with one's ability to speak to others in-game with a microphone and customize their individual character, much like American military personnel do with their uniforms, manages to blur the boundaries of the virtual and the real to the point where they are almost enmeshed with one another.
It's this enmeshment that has been attempted to be duplicated by the American military through their online multiplayer game and recruitment tool, America's Army, otherwise known as AA, not to be confused with Duracell. Released in 2002, America's Army is an FPS that was designed to educate and train American soldiers for combat, in addition to serving as a recruitment tool. Focusing the brunt of its gameplay on team cooperation, this game is, in this gamer's opinion, the closest one can hope to get to training in the US Army without leaving the confines of a completely artificial space. Divided into 3 fire team squads, the game forces players to rely on their teammates in order to complete whatever objectives the game throws at them. Unlike the Modern Warfare and Halo series, this game also gives gamers the opportunity to participate in special training for different class positions, including medical training, driving training for the Humvee, and even CROWS training. Now, for those of you who don't know what CROWS training is, it stands for Common Remotely Operated Weapon Station. The fact that CROWS training is an available training option to pursue in America's Army is astounding, not because of the realism that it is employed with its inclusion in the game, but rather its showcasing of the depth of virtuality in a gaming space that is possible. Jean Baudrillard would probably flip out if he were to see the extent to which America's Army is able to get away with being so meta. Upon looking at the way the game is constructed, one can see that this game gives players the ability to remotely operate a virtual weapon, which is an extension of a virtual vehicle, inside a virtual theater of war that is populated by a virtual representation of the US Army that was constructed by the US Army.
It's this massive self-referentiality within America's army that successfully allows for the border of contemporary warfare and the virtual barrier that is used to separate individuals from it to almost completely merge. Sure, games like Halo and Modern Warfare grant players a technological perspective that America's army doesn't capitalize nearly as much on, but where they excel at providing gamers with this technological extension of themselves, they forgo the realism that is associated with the limited technology and perspectives that are at players' disposal in America's army.
To add on to the realism that is associated with it, America's Army has gone on to experience a graphical overhaul up to its current iteration of the game, America's Army 3, with the aid of the Unreal Engine 3, a game engine that has been applied to creating high-definition graphics through the use of per-pixel lighting and high dynamic range rendering, otherwise known as HDRR, to name a couple specs of the engine, on such games as the Mass Effect games and Batman Arkham City. AA3's gradual progression toward the real in the virtual realm of gaming complements the real-time tactics and weapon perspectives that are used in both the Halo and Modern Warfare games. Thus, it would appear that the hybridization of the perspective of virtual technology and weaponry that is exemplified in the film Black Hawk Down has reached its pinnacle of realization within the gaming industry and will continue to be used to the advantage of the American military as it tirelessly searches for ways in which to further blur the lines of reality and virtuality in contemporary warfare. After all, what better way to create efficient killing machines than to give American soldiers a virtual mindset of non-consequentiality when they are sent by the American military to carry out all too real acts of violence?